Welcome to Brick by Brick. Join me, Lauren Winnett, as I share my personal journey of building a thriving real estate and hard money lending business from the ground up. Along the way, we'll explore the strategies, challenges, and breakthroughs that come with growing wealth. Whether you're a seasoned investor or aspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the world of private lending and real estate, this podcast is packed with actionable insights, real-world stories, and mindset tips to help you build your own path to success, brick by brick. Welcome to another episode of Brick by Brick. I'm your host, Lauren Winnett. Today, we have an excellent guest with us, Blake Anderson. Blake is a local builder, general contractor, and developer in the Raleigh market. I've had the extreme pleasure of meeting Blake in person several times at several meetings and have found his insights into what he does, how he approaches business, partnership, and the industry to be very refreshing. And I'm extremely excited to have Blake on the podcast today. Blake, thanks for joining us.
Lauren, it's an honor. I'll tell you, I've really been enjoying doing the deep dive of the interviews. Such a wealth of knowledge of so many different people that bring these different angles to real estate and business. So I appreciate all that you're doing with the Brick by Brick podcast.
I appreciate the kind words. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how much people know when you start actually digging into them. Most of the people that I've got the chance to know, they just have such a wealth of knowledge, and you see them and you get to experience just most of the time, just a small sliver of that. And then you really start going in and there's a huge story behind that. And there's a huge amount of information that is just waiting to come out to help other people get to where they are or even surpass that.
You know, and I think along those lines, what's so cool about the guests that you've had is I didn't recognize any of their names. And that's what made it so great. Like, I could relate because they weren't someone on a billboard. They weren't someone that had a $1 billion brand, right? It was just like someone that looked like me who was making their way in the real estate world or in the business world, and they felt just accessible. And so I just really appreciated real conversations with real people. I think a lot of us consume podcasts and we're looking for someone famous, but oftentimes famous people just feel out of reach. They feel like they're doing something that's not even really relevant to me. And of course, Grant Cardone can do it. He's a billionaire, right? But you know, what about the guy who's building 20 homes in your local market, right? Or the person who started a lending company. So I've really appreciated your guests in that way.
Yeah, it's so true. I think when we started this off, the whole premise around Brick by Brick was that to get to where you want to go, either wealth or business wise, it's building a foundation and then slowly building upon that. And let's say I build a foundation and then I try to jump 5 levels up and put those bricks in place. It'll never work. And so you have to find mentors and people around you that are 1 to 2 steps ahead of you and get their insights, because the information that you might get from a Grant Cardone or someone that's 10 steps ahead is not going to be helpful. They'll tell you stuff that you need to know, but you just don't need to know it yet. And if you try to implement it, it'll be a waste of time. So Blake, like I mentioned, local developer. So you have 20 years of experience in building, 17 as a general contractor. You've been in investing for 10 years. And most of what we have talked about up to this point is specifically development. Mm-hmm. So let's base set the audience. When we say development, give me a definition, a working definition that we can use for this podcast on what development specifically is.
Yeah, I think, you know, most time if we talk about construction, we talk about development can be all encapsulating, but I think for this conversation, we could talk about development as it relates to land or land that's being repurposed or used. So I can have a greater development that I'm going to eventually build on, but there's also exits along the way where I can take a piece of land and repurpose it or develop it in a way that hasn't been before. So I'm going to be doing some improvement in land. Let's just call development that way. Now, as a builder, most of the developing I do helps my building because we do a lot of construction. We build quite a few homes every year. But a lot of folks will get into land development and they don't need to be a builder. I really wouldn't recommend anyone become a general contractor or a builder unless you just love that or have a background in it. But lots of people can develop land, hire the right team, hire the right builder that in essence will make them a builder through proxy of a team.
I think that's a really important point to make, because even, before I started lending space and getting into developing and lending to that group, when I thought developer, I thought of someone that basically built homes, right? You don't segregate the chunk of, hey, I took this raw field or this woods and I cut the trees down, I subdivided it into lots, developing it, and then building it, basically pouring foundations and putting wood in, roofs, and selling homes, right? They can be the same, but oftentimes they're segregated.
Yeah, oftentimes they are, and a lot of people don't even realize like there's a part of development where nothing is improved in the property. The improvement is done on paper. So you'll see paper developers or people who are entitlement specialists, and they're taking that ground and they're taking it through entitlement with all the approvals, with zoning and doing the legwork to figure out what you can do. And that is a value in and of itself, and are selling it off entitled. So someone's buying it knowing for a fact you can build something, even though the land wasn't improved physically, the land was improved with what it was given approval to do. So that's the cool thing about development. As you add it to construction, it just adds a couple extra exit points where we have these different off ramps that you can decide how long you want to stay in. And there's ways to mitigate risk by getting off at certain on and off ramps, depending on what your team is, what your time horizon, or what your capital structure looks like.
Yeah, makes sense. So, can we give a practical example? Let's say that we've got I don't know, 15-acre lot, right? Field. Let's call it a field. There's no trees on it. And you're going to buy that. We're just going to make up numbers here. So, we're going to buy that for $1 million, right? So, it's pretty straightforward. What kind of value along the way are you adding by doing the steps? So, in my mind, the steps are, there's things in there, but paper lots, then horizontal, and then vertical. So paper lots, you're just on paper, splitting it into lots. Horizontal, you're putting the roads in, you're putting the utilities, but you're not building anything yet. And then vertical would be you're putting foundations and you're going up.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the one way to think about it, the initial value that you're providing that land is you're removing risk. Okay. We see lots of people make lots of money developing land, but we don't see the people who are losing money developing land. And trust me, there are plenty of people, me included, who've lost money and are losing money developing land. And a lot of times there's the hidden things, the unknowns are in the approval process. Okay. Your neighbor did something really meaningful, really great. Well, I'm going to do something just like my neighbor. Well, not so fast, right? There are approvals that come with your zoning in your planning departments, your county and municipality level. And so the first part of that entitlement process, you're becoming entitled to build something there, is you're initially removing risk and you're providing certainty into a piece of ground. Because, land is really only worth what you can build on it. But just because my neighbor built 50 homes doesn't mean that I can. So there's different parts of the certainty that you're providing the land that it is bringing confidence. And so, like real estate all the way through is a risk reward game, right? The greater the risk I'm willing to take, the more reward I expect. And as risk is removed out of the equation, the reward goes with it. Right. And so if I'm going to go in on a piece of raw land that there's no planning or entitlement work done yet, that's still risky land, depending on where it's located and if there's a myriad of factors, but if there's water and sewer and things like that available. And so as I remove that risk by providing certainty, I'm taking reward with me. So that's kind of like a first principles way to look at development. Remove risk, take reward with you. The longer I stay in, there's other value to take. But as a builder, I develop land. I also buy lots that are ready to buy. And so I'm willing to pay more for a lot that's entitled because I don't write in pencil, I can write in pen on my underwriting formula, right? I know that I can build this thing here, so I don't have that level of risk. There's also a time factor with land development. It's a long process. And so as a builder, if I can buy a build ready lot where I'm not tying up capital or, for a long period of time, and I can just buy it and get started, well, there's quite a bit of value there too, because there's a time value of money in that. So, hopefully we didn't make things more complicated with this answer. I really want to make it, cleaner as we start thinking first principally risk reward and time value of money when it comes to land.
Yeah, no. So I think we take a step back and break it down a little bit. So when you're removing, let's say that piece of ground, you've got 10 acres. I'm going to say $10 million, just so it's really easy, $1 million an acre. And so then you're going to break that into, let's just say you're going to break it into 10 lots. Mm-hmm. At the sale of paper lots, that lot would be worth substantially less than when you get it all the way to the point where you're ready to build on it. But that also means that there's a lot more profit to be made. Let's say that you took it all the way through because you own it at an earlier stage. You can make a lot more at the sale, but you also have the opportunity to sell that lot prior to the horizontal. You also have the opportunity to sell that lot after the horizontal or sell after the things are built out. And so you have more options there,
Right.
but you also have the risk of the city not approving something, you're not getting the water you need.
Yep.
Talk to me about some of those risks in that early
Yeah.
phase, because I think a lot of investors, and we're seeing this specifically at even the meeting that you and I met at was a panel. That room was full of people that were interested in land development.
Right.
But I don't think, I think everyone sees, oh, I'm going to take this chunk of land, I'm going to chop it up into pieces, and I'm going to sell it. Easiest money ever made.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about some of the risks that you're seeing, you've experienced, and what could happen to that chunk of ground, from the time you buy it or even from the time you put it in a contract to when you actually can sell it.
Yeah. Let me tell a couple of horror stories, real life horror stories to kind of prove the point, right? And I'll tell on myself a couple times, and I'll also bring one of the worst ones I've heard recently. That was a client brought a project to my desk. So there's so many approvals that along the way, and most of the information you need is public information, but not all of it. And there's real risk in having a limited process. New developers don't know what they don't know. So we'll just tell a story. So we have a major highway coming out of Raleigh, North Carolina, going north. It is a high transit corridor. It's got long-term plans of expansion that's going to allow population to grow further and further north, connected to the city center. I got a project brought to me. It was a guy who bought 20 acres, spent $600,000 on it. He wanted to build a community of mixed between townhomes and single family, trying to do some luxury single family in the midst. North of him was some townhomes with not luxury, but townhome community with single family community. And south of him, he had a very similar thing going. So to him, this is a slam dunk. I got it all around. The market's being proved by the developments happening around me. He bought it. The realtor was the one who brought it to me. I said, this sounds great. I think your comps that you're comping by seem to check out based on what I would expect in the area. Have you talked to the county yet? Well, no, we haven't made any calls yet. Okay, we'll put a comma there. Let me make a few calls and let's talk next week. So I called the county planning department and we had about an hour meeting. And in this hour meeting, we're talking about this choice 20 acres in this transit corridor. And they said, you got a few issues with this land. We're not going to tell you can't build here, but let's go through the list here. First, you're not zoned for residential. You're zoned for general business. Okay, rezoning, it happens. Here's the thing, the projects that you're mentioning, in order to be approved, you're going to have to make a significant mixed use kind of commercial part of your development as a part of this, because you'll likely get some residential, but only in the rear portion of the property because the county wants commercial here. Okay, that starts to change the game plan, right? But okay, we probably can work with it. Second problem is there is a long-term transit plan for this corridor. And if you look at this transit plan, there is scheduled to be an on-off ramp go literally right through the middle of your parcel. There is a road that stops at the major highway that is scheduled to be continued right through the middle of your parcel. So by the time that's said and done, you're likely going to have about 5 or 6 acre portion that's not touched by this on-off ramp or this highway or this road extension. Now, if that's not bad enough, they said, here's the thing. The county is not allocating water and sewer right now, and they're prioritizing the commercial. Residential is not getting any water and sewer allocation at the moment. So you'll likely need to get in line and hope that is opened up, but we can't guarantee any. So here, this slam dunk of a deal in the choice location at a good number, all of a sudden is completely falling apart. And the guy's best case exit scenario is to try to get NCDOT to eminent domain his property early and buy him out to recoup that money. So the unfortunate part about this deal is so much of this information was just a call away. If he would have had the right process and the right knowledge, he would have never bought this deal. It was really all at his fingertips. But here he was, probably got the bug. He probably owned real estate before. He saw this thing come up in a great area and thought, I'm going to jump on it. Wow, $600,000. Look what I can do here. and he didn't take the time to follow the process necessary to properly underwrite a land deal.
Do you think it's common for people to forget that the government has a plan that stretches out 5, 10, 20 years and think that they're just going to be able to do whatever they want and the government will go along with it?
That is a great question, because if you look at where this guy's property is, and I'm answering your question, he's not phase one. He's phase two or phase three. So it's potentially 2030 before this comes into play. But based on the conversation I had with the planning department, they didn't seem likely to approve any plan that he was going to make on this property unless he contended with what they're planning to do on his property. To me, it's like that is way too far out in the future to behold someone. At the same time, I guess if you're a state government planning this transit corridor, you have to think in that kind of terms. So I don't see how they don't. At the same time, it just seems really harsh and limiting to property owners to hold everybody hostage for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, but on the other side of that, like if eminent domain comes in and they've already built houses there, it's far more expensive and costly to either move the road or to buy land that's got houses on it, versus just raw land. So,
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing was that the guy's response was, "Why didn't someone tell me?" And it's like, why didn't you make the call? You're the one putting the money down. The unfortunate truth is I love realtors and I work with agents, but I don't trust a thing that the agent says, because agents are incentivized to sell a piece of property and make the commission when it transacts. That agent is not incentivized at what may happen 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And so his agent was thinking about transacting and not thinking about that. And he probably used an agent who doesn't deal with land, didn't even know, the process. I have some of my clients right now are folks that have been agents for 25 years and have never done any land development and have no clue about a UDO or zoning ordinance. And they're really fun to educate, but it's new to them too. It's unfortunate, but the onus is on the person putting the money down. And so, word to the wise: if you're going to put money down on the piece of property, then you got to take time to learn the game, to learn the rules. And hey, I've lost plenty of money buying bad deals. I mean, we have a land evaluation checklist that may be worth a couple $100,000, Lauren, and I can value it just in lost money. And every line item on the checklist is a result of a deal went bad because we didn't know what we didn't know. So it's also part of, you live and learn. And if you're committed to something long-term enough, you hope, you stay in the industry long enough to make your money back and just treat it as continuing education.
right. Well, I hope that if nothing else comes out of this, that people understand that they can call the government and ask questions about parcels that they don't own. Because, I think the layman person just thinks, okay, I can't really ask a lot of questions or they're not going to give me answers about this until I own it. But having lent on these development deals, like we get a lot of stuff done before we even purchase the property, from an engineering standpoint, from a permitting standpoint. Like there's some things you can't do until you own it, but you can get stuff right up to the finish line prior to even owning the property, which really reduced the purchaser's risk.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just want to add just one or two thoughts on that, because you're right. I don't think most people have thought about that. They think, if you've ever bought something at auction, you don't get access to a property, but whoever owns land, the tax records, it's all public information. How a piece of property is zoned is all public information. Even the permits and inspections and failed inspections and past inspections on a property is public information. You have every right as someone who's just interested in a property, even if you don't own it, to call the government and ask them questions about that parcel. So, take advantage of that. The other thing we're saying is, when you start to get into purchasing land, you've got to be willing to spend some money even before you purchase property. It was taught to me early from a continuing ed teacher on land evaluation, is like, you would much rather spend $3,000 and turn it and walk away from a deal, or even 30 grand and walk away from the deal, than lose 300,000. So there's a point in which you just are going to have to be willing to spend some money and chalk it up to pursuit costs in the process of purchasing land, which goes to the value of buying entitled land or a build ready lot. That person has already paid the money to survey it, to make sure that the city's approved it, to get water and sewer allocated. So they've already put money into that land. Even if it's just on paper, it's still value, and that's been done, money that's been paid that you're benefiting from.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that it stands to reason to just tell people right now that land development is not something you're just going to start off like cold, never done any real estate. And definitely, if you have no cash, you're not going to start into land development. You can make a lot of money in land development, you can lose a lot of money, but you have to have money to basically move the process forward. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at even bigger risk, right?
Yeah.
And I think coming from the lending side of things, there's not a lot of lenders that lend on just the land that are going to do that development side. And we are all looking for the creme de la creme of developers that have had those hard lessons, that have worked through all those things, because we are putting our money at risk and basically aren't involved in the process at all. And so we want to know that the people that are doing the process know what the heck they're doing when we invest our money in it, right?
Yeah. Well, I just remember a conversation that you and I had after one of those panels with a guy who was asking me about land terms. And he says, "What do you think of those terms?" I say, "Well, if you compare it to your 30-year mortgage, they're horrible." But the thing is, this lender's bearing all the risk. There's so much more risk in what he's lending on versus the home that's already built. There's no risk in that home that's built. It's risk reward all the way through. Land is risky. You mitigate your risks through your knowledge, through a process, through tools, through a team, right? But there's still some uncertainty there, which is why, the terms are going to change depending on where at in the process. And it does take money, or you have to have someone on the team, whether it's a capital investor that has money. And probably if you just bought a couple rentals, buying 20 acres is probably not your next play. But you can buy a build ready lot. You can
Mm-hmm.
buy a rental that has room to build an ADU in the back. You can buy a house in a neighborhood and where you knock down an old house and build one in its place. Like, there's ways to get started that you start to familiarize yourself with the process. And then you also start to realize whether you like that process or not, the development process. And those are safe ways. You bet big, and you lose big. Start with something what's the worst you lose? You lose 30 grand. Okay. It's not 300. Right? You can recover pretty quickly from a 30 grand loss if your single family or duplex, development doesn't go well and it doesn't sell well on the back end. But you buy 20 acres intending to put 20 home sites, and then in the end, you can only put 12 or 10, or worse. And now all of a sudden, there's no way that you can get out of that deal and recoup your money, right? But start in manageable ways. Start small, because the process that we use to underwrite a small deal is the same steps as a large deal. The steps just don't take as long, and there's less money that's put up to risk in the beginning.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really great points. I always tell people, so real estate is like there's stair steps, right? It's hard to get a fix and flip loan until you fix and flip. So you got to find someone to kind of mentor you through that.
Yep.
And that goes right up to building, to developing, all those things. So, I think one way you could get in, if you had a relationship with a developer, you could find the deal. There's always three pieces to a deal, right? There's the deal, there's the time, and there's the money. Find a deal, find someone that knows what they're doing, partner up, take a tiny little piece of the equity maybe, but you get it on your resume and you work the process, and it gives you a lot better leg up on the next one and the next one. And that's how I would tell someone that's just getting started. You're not going to make much money on the first couple,
Right.
but the knowledge that you gain is going to be what helps you, springboards you into the money in 2 years, 3 years.
And you said it, and I just want to tag on to what you said. The knowledge, but also the experience. So you as a lender, like, you would validate, lenders care about your experience. And so if you can gain experience by piggybacking with someone else on another deal, or bring a partner into your deal that has that experience speaks volumes to a lender. And so however you need to do to get that experience, if you got to pay for it through giving out equity, or you got to pay a little bit even, now that's getting you in position for the next deals that you're going to do. So now you have track record and credibility for a lender that you may solicit for funds.
Yeah, well, it's going to help you in the long term too, because you're short cycling all those losses that you took, right, or the other developer took, and you'll still find things that are weird that make you lose money, or hurt you along the way, but they're going to be a lot less. That learning curve is a lot less short.
That's right.
You used the term a while back, and I want to come back to it because it's very important in this space, and that's UDO.
Mm-hmm.
So, can we just define UDO, talk through UDO, and some of the challenges and opportunities that UDOs offer?
So I call the UDO the rules of the game. So the UDO stands for Unified Development Ordinances. And if you are going to develop property, that becomes your rule book. And so the UDO is where all the rules of a municipality on what they allow to be developed, built, signages, fences, where that's all laid out. And the important thing about the UDO is it is the law. It is somewhat open for interpretation by the local government, but also every city and county has their own UDO. So the rules of the game where I live will be different than the rules of the game 5 miles from where I live. My guess is where I'm building a project today will be different, the rules, than a project that you're lending on tomorrow. So it's worth saying, but you get really comfortable with the set of rules. I see early developers, and we did it ourselves, make mistakes by trying to translate and transfer some of those habits that you develop through those rules into other municipalities. And they are not the same, and they don't even look the same.
So, is that why a lot of developers are very focused on specific cities or specific counties when they're buying land?
Yeah, that's it. So these rules get complicated, convoluted. They can be a web. A lot of times, because like I say, they're open to interpretation, you start to not only know the rules, but then you know the interpretation of a place. And you realize, like, when that doesn't translate, learning another set of rules might take you years. And there's so much risk involved with buying the wrong deal that if you don't know all the rules, then you could buy a deal and not pay off because the rules are different. So let me tell a story or two just to paint this picture, right? So we bought a property in Fuquay Varina. It's just south of Raleigh in North Carolina. And we intended on tearing down a house and building 3 houses. Not a huge deal. And so we thought we did our due diligence, right? We looked through the UDO. I had a cursory conversation with someone at the planning department, which, by the way, not everybody that answers the phone knows what they're talking about. And we said, hey, great, we'll knock this one down with what the new setbacks are, because this was an old infill lot, probably platted 100 years ago. We can now put 3 in its place. Okay, purchased the property, tore the house down, created our site plan, had our first approval meeting with the town, and they said, oh, you can't build 3 here unless if you build 3, they have to be rear loaded, which means they have to be loaded through an alleyway. Well, guess what, Lauren? There was no alleyway. And this lot was in the middle of a city street, and there was no alleyway from the right and no alleyway from the left. Doesn't matter. The rule is, which was an infill standard. So that's another thing. So you have the UDO, but the UDO has infill standards and overlay districts that have these auxiliary rules that layer on top, and they're in totally different chapters. The infill standard required rear loading. So now instead of 3, we were lucky enough, it was a double lot that was originally platted as 2. We could build 2, but that one lost unit, and we broke even on the deal. We didn't make any money because we bought it assuming we could build 3. So the UDO is so important in knowing the UDO. So now here's the problem. That was the only construction I've ever done in that town. And so it was in the same county that I've built in before. So I felt like, hey, that's a great area. The lots are a good price. We know that town. It's in the same county.
Mm-hmm.
Let's build down there. But we didn't know the rules of the game because we had built in all these other areas and we interpreted their UDO wrong, and it bit us. And we didn't lose money, but we didn't make any money.
Yeah, not a good use of capital over time, right?
No, not at all. I mean, we've got friends that I have friends that are specialists in Raleigh. I'm kind of a Durham, North Carolina specialist. We develop all over the place, but I was particular specialty with Durham UDO. And I have friends that have Raleigh UDO, and they will send me their deal before they even come to Durham because they don't want to learn those rules. They have become so focused on the rules and the personalities in their area. So yeah, a lot of developers find it. So if you're new, you're thinking about getting into it, identify 2 or 3, no more than that that you start to learn the UDO. And a great way to learn a UDO is take a deal that's come across your desk, maybe a small deal from a wholesaler or something on the MLS, and underwrite that deal with the UDO. Even if you don't want to buy the deal, go through the whole process of looking through the UDO, talking to the planning department, talking to public works, and trying to find out all the ins and outs. And a lot of times they're going to educate you along the way.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And it goes to anything that you want to do in real estate or investing. And that's how I got into real estate is I picked the market I was going to do. And every day I underwrote 3 deals. Didn't even have to be deals that I knew were going to be good or bad. And what you develop is memory or muscle memory and how to do it, what the steps are. And then eventually it short cycles the process a bit. And so you can look at a deal and be like, nah, that's not going to work like that,
Yep.
versus looking at it and spending time chewing through it.
I mean, what used to take us probably a half a day to underwrite just a basic small parcel land deal. I mean, especially if it's infill, I can do in like 10 minutes because I didn't have a process. And so normally what would happen, I'd get a deal and the first thing I'd do is I'd drive 45 minutes away to go look at the deal. And then I'd make some calls and then I'd look at some things, and 4 or 5 hours later, I'd find out it doesn't work because I didn't know the process and the order, right? And so now a deal comes to me and someone's like, hey, can we meet at the property? No, I'm going to look on I can check so many boxes in about 2 minutes just on the GIS and the UDO. And then I've got a couple emails that I'm going to send out. And then if those all check out, I might go drive to the property. But, all that is compressed through that compound interest of reps that you just put in, like you say, by just underwriting over and over and over again.
Yeah, I got to believe that also helps, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but of getting to know who the people are in the government, who to talk to, who to avoid. If you'd done more stuff in Fuquay, maybe you would have known like, hey, this is not the person I need to talk to. Can you please pass me over to here? Or maybe you get answers quicker because you start building a relationship with some of these folks.
That's totally it. We see the government as like this big monolith bureaucracy, but there's just people that work there. And those are the people that are going to sign off on things. Those are the people that are going to grant you approvals. And most of those people have been in the same job for many years. And they're the ones that are going to give the signature every single time. And so to your point, not just the UDO, but the personalities of the people granting approval. Instead of sending an email to like the general directory, which like in Raleigh, I may or may not get a response from, I go straight to the planner that I have developed a relationship with who knows me. So now we have some back and forth and I'm not waiting for them to get it. And they also recognize my name, similar to whether it's public works or whatever, it's those people. So they recognize you, but then you're also just compressing in that time by knowing how to go straight to that information.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important information. So now we're in the process. We talked to the county or talked to the city. We've kind of gotten to know some of the UDOs. If I'm to that point, I've run some reps, like what is the next step to getting a piece of property, taking it to that level? And how do I know, or let's take it a step back. How do you know where your exit is? And I know you're a builder, but when you're looking at it, do I want to sell this at paper lots? Do I want to sell this at horizontal? Do I want to take it vertical? And what are some of those decision criteria to make that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably really one of the most relevant of this whole interview. Probably, I think everything starts with a strategy, right? In my strategy, because I'm a builder and just logistically, I have a construction company that needs to stay busy and build. Like it or not, I'm a little siloed into residential construction. Now that can be a downfall sometimes because that somewhat limits the way I see property, but you need to kind of start with a strategy. What do you want to take something to the end? Do you just want to do paper lots? And you're going to probably have to do a number of each to try to figure out what's comfortable for you. But first, we're kind of thinking about strategy. We're evaluating our deal. We start to run our numbers. Think about exit ramps in this way. On paper, you should make the most money if you stay into the end, right? But there's a couple of off ramps that maximize time value of money that sometimes it's worth just go ahead and getting out of the deal, because it's not uncommon for the developer to make the money in the builder because the market may be softened to come out with not much left on the deal. And it's sometimes an optimal point just to go ahead and cash in early on. So you're starting, I mean, we're always working with the end in mind. So I'm thinking through what is the value of the home that's going to be sold here. And I start to back my way into my offer price. And then I also start to think about that helps me identify some of those off ramps. So we have entitled land, then we have plotted lots, so created physical lots, and then we have a build structure. And those are multiple off ramps, and you can kind of do the math on kind of that risk reward calculation at each step, and you're factoring in that time horizon, right? So entitlement seems to take most of the time, but then creating it into paper lots, you're going, or to physical lots, you're going through a subdivision process and you have to put some roads in. So that's going to be capital intensive. So some of that decision is kind of brought through what kind of capital you have access to, and what do you think the return might be, and then potentially who your team is as well. So if you're not a builder and you don't have a relationship with someone like me, you could look to see if you can find someone who's a great fit for the deal to be a partner all the way through. And if you don't have a good gut feel about it, you say, well, let's just stop here. Let's sell the lots created to other builders, and I'll just take my gains right now and let them have some gains on the back end.
I think a point to call out there is you start from the top, meaning what you're going to sell or sell the property for. If you get that wrong, everything cascades down and is wrong, and not like linearly,
No.
right? So it's very important to get that number right, but be conservative. Like, oh, I saw a condo, 8 miles over that sold for 475. That's what I'm going to price it at. You're small in size. There's some closer. I'm actually going to price that at like 410. I think it might sell for 435, but let's price it at 410 just for contingency purposes. Experienced investors will do that, but new investors will look at what the top end opportunity is. And that's just a good way to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. And if there's any added risk on the deal, you need to lower that number even more. So I had a seller, well, it was a wholesaler bringing a deal to me today. We talked about it before, and it was going to be almost 6 acres, but it had a couple of factors in it that made it riskier. The side of town it was in, the fact that the road is only a gravel road and would have to be improved, and we don't know the level that the city would make us. It had a couple extra risk factors that, and we have a little bit of softened market on that side of town. And I just told him, I'm going to have to start at such a lower number because, like you say, there's cascading risk here that I just will have no idea, maybe even till the very end. And when we're talking about 30 townhomes on this site, right? That's a lot. If I miss little, multiply that over 30, it could be a big deal. You got 2 homes in there and you miss, okay. But if you miss on 30, you could be stuck holding a really big bag. So yeah, that's, adding, just as risk increases, you've got to be a little bit more conservative with your numbers.
Yeah. And I think the quote of no deal is better than a bad deal falls into that category very strongly, because a lot of times those wholesalers or whoever, the seller, will think that this is the best thing and they don't agree. And, maybe you really want a deal right now, but it's not worth taking on a bad deal because you're going to get yourself into some problems.
Yeah. And, if I can bring up the flip side of that coin, on almost completely opposite way, land is worth what you can do with it. And the person who can be most creative with it can make the most money with it, also pay the most for a piece of land. So the more you know your UDO and the more you know your niche market, the more you know what you can or can't do with that land, then you can be a lot more confident in what can be sold there. And so I've seen people, especially in Durham, has so many different pockets where prices swing wildly. And you really have to specialize, not just in that city, but also by the neighborhood. And we've seen some people get away with things that didn't make sense on paper, but they sold at really high prices because that person, and some of these were deals I passed up on, that person knew that neighborhood enough to know what would sell there. And they were able to pay more than me. And then they were able to make money that I couldn't because had that knowledge base.
I mean, their knowledge is decreasing their risk threat, their risk factor. And so that's a great point across all of real estate, right? You get paid for the size of problems that you solve. And the more you know, the more you get paid.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here. So I think one of the things that you and I talked about before and offline is that one of the reasons you've been so successful over the years is you've had an incredible business partner, right? And how you've grown that business. And I think that too often we get focused on finding the right deal and the deal makes the money, but we forget that having the right people in our corner and the right people that we work with that offset our strengths and weaknesses are really what helped drive you forward. Yes. So can you talk a little bit about that partnership, how it came to be, what kind of benefit that it's had, and maybe what some of the struggles that you've had with having them?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, real estate is a team sport. You watch podcasts like this, there's one guy sitting in front of the screen, right? And behind me is 14 other people on our team. And I have been the beneficiary of a great partner. So my story goes like this. I have been in the construction world for 20 years. I've been a builder for 17 years. And prior to my relationship with my now partner, I didn't have exhaustive real estate experience. And at the time our partnership formed, my partner flipped homes, and he flipped maybe about one a month. And I had an extensive background in rehabbing and large rehabs, and he was trying to add more of that to what he could do. And so I started out just as a vendor. I was managing the projects that he had. But our relationship, we found that we could solve problems really well together. We brought complementary skill sets together, and things exploded and took off. And our team has really been built on the backs of that, but it was built on our partnership and really valuing not just what we brought to the table, but especially what we didn't bring to the table. And so Dana, my partner, he's a realtor. He worked for a company that flipped all over the country. He's got so many reps of underwriting deals. He knows lending really well. He's great with numbers. What he didn't have was the construction experience and the building background. And so he was able to leverage my skill set. I've been able to leverage him. We're now partners in quite a bit of real estate and then the venture that we have. And so there is so much to do in a real estate transaction, especially if you're going to take it all the way to finished product. I mean, there's probably about 100 different skill sets and about 150 micro transactions. You can't possibly be good at all of it. And if you try to be, you're going to likely have blind spots with some mistakes and failures waiting to bite you. But when you expand your knowledge base and your capability through effective partnerships, now all of a sudden those blind spots get shored up. And this isn't an addition game. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 × 1 = 100, right? When you have the right partnership. And so the right partner isn't just adding to you. This is someone that you're multiplying off of and someone that you can build trust with. And so it's been a tremendous benefit to me, but it hasn't come without its challenges. I mean, what's kind of what we joke around is our team, they think that we're best of friends. They don't know behind closed doors in some of our strategy meetings. I mean, there's some serious disagreement sometimes, right? But what we've learned is that if I really trust what Dana brings to the table, and I know that we're trying to get to the same end point, and if he really trusts what I bring to the table, the conflict actually is what births the most creative solutions. Like some of our best ideas were birthed out of our willingness to sit in the tension of conflict as we lobbied our points together long enough and passionately enough, but considerately enough that we birthed these wonderful business ideas that have just helped us scale over the years. So I recommend partnerships. You can only do so much. We're careful about how quickly we go into partnership with people, but there's this humility in knowing like we need people. And we need people that bring the skills to the table that we don't have.
Yeah, I think the point of complementary partners, it can't be hammered enough. I see too often like, oh, me and my best friend, we're going to start a partnership. And like, okay, but what skills do each of you have? And it turns out that both of you have very similar skill sets. I experienced this. It wasn't even my best friend, but I was in a partnership with someone. We grew pretty significant size real estate portfolio together. But at the end of the day, we both wanted to be kind of the front person. We both had kind of the same marketing sales skill set. And what happened was one of us, me, had to do a lot of the back end stuff, and it was miserable doing so. And it wasn't a good long-term partnership because there was no one there that had those skills that we needed to operate the business. And so someone had to do them. And what happens when you do something you don't like is you're never as good at it as if someone does like it. And so in my next partnership, I picked up a partner that had no desire to be on the front end. His skills were very much on the financial, the detail oriented side, all the things that I disliked. And we are a much better team. No offense to the other partner, but just because we are complementing skills, we aren't the best friends. We are basically business partners, and we have disagreements. It's a bit of a marriage, but we're not hanging out at each other's houses on the weekends or sharing family meals or anything. We are there to grow a business together, and we know that we can do it better together than we can.
Oh man, I was such a, that's one thing Dana said from the beginning of our partnership is we never want to hire anybody that doesn't want to do what they're doing for very long, because you just won't do as good of a job. And we've believed that about each other. And so the scale that we've accomplished in our business and continue to accomplish is because we continue to fight for each other to get rid of the things that we're not good at and frustrate us. And so there's a part of partnership where you're like, oh, thank God this person's doing the thing I don't want. But you need to be watching your partner and realize, have I just overloaded that person with crap that they're not good at or don't want? And now that's sucking away from the time that they could really be in their genius. And so we are always watching each other and say, how can we hire or create a system that continues to pull these things off of each other's plate? Because the more time we free up with each other, the bigger the problems that we get to solve. Continuing to think the same thing for our employees as well. Continuing, like Jim Collins said, you get the right people on the bus first, but then you start to find their right seat, and just always working to get people in the right seat. Because when someone's in the right seat, it's really magical the things that they'll accomplish just by getting them positioned in the right place, and they'll mean wonders to your business.
Yeah, and effortlessly accomplished, right? It's not a huge task to do it. They're like, oh, I just was thinking about this and I built this thing. I'm like, this is great, right? We never would have come up with this before. Versus someone that has to do the job and it's just drudgery, and eventually you're going to have turnover, or it's going to break apart depending on what.
And think about this: if you think about the things that you hate to do, there is someone out there who loves it, and they are waiting for you to ask for help. I mean, it was the most eye-opening thing. I remember we hired a woman to do some admin things and bookkeeping things, and she was at my disposal to start offloading things. And at first I was so nervous to ask her to help me, because I'm like, who in the world want to do this stuff? Right? She's going to quit if I keep asking her to do this. And then eventually I realized, no, she loved it. And the more of it I gave her, the happier it was, because it was effortless to her. She loved tracking down every little detail. It's like a dog on a bone. She was wonderful at it. And it just freed me up to do the things that I thrive in. And she did so much better of a job than I ever could. So she wasn't upset that I asked her to do it. She was happy. So when you bring people on, you're looking at someone who is excited to do that thing that you hate to do.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think also the point of watching your partner to see if they're getting overwhelmed. We all have egos, right? And we never want to be the weak link. And so I think it's very important to look at your people that you're working with and like, are they delegating enough of their work? And if they aren't, why? Is it because they don't want to? Is it because they don't know how to? Or is it because you don't have the systems and processes in place to make that transition easy? The worst thing you can do is just say, I'm the only one that can do that, and never let anyone take it over, because you're locking yourself into that spot in the business and you're stunting the growth of your business. And honestly, you're denying someone else a job that could help them feed their family.
Yeah, that's right. And we think, I can afford someone else. Well, maybe you can't, but what we found is when you hire the right people, they pay for themselves. They create
it's an investment.
It's an investment. At first, it feels like it might be a little uncomfortable, but if you're creative, the right people create scale that makes room for them.
100%. So talk to me just a touch about the processes and systems that you guys have created. Specifically, talk to me about the process, the underwriting process or checklist that you've mentioned.
Yeah. Happy to do it. I mean, like you, Lauren, we're a process-based business. I mean, everything's got a process. We don't want people to memorize, keep anything in their head. So we leverage technology quite a bit. And, most of the tools out there, they're not complete. And so I think you talked with another guest recently about the Google Drive empire, and we've definitely had the Google Drive empire at times in our business, but it's got to get out of your head. You're not going to scale until you can replicate it, and you've got to create it in a way that other people other than you can continue to do the same thing over and over again. you know, we build every house using a project management software that's got checklists and a schedule. So everything is always done the same way. And then on the planning and acquisition side, every property that we buy has to go through the exact same checklist that ensures that we don't miss a step. And so we use generally a 7-step framework that takes us from our strategy all the way to our exit. And each one of those steps has a unique either checklist, process, or calculator that makes sure that we're underwriting everything. You're going to do a lot on back of a napkin when you're just starting to wrap your head around some things, but you're not going to go under contract, and you're certainly not going to close until you've fully underwritten a deal. And you want to make sure that you're underwriting every deal the exact same way and that you don't skip any steps. One misstep can be the make or break to your deal. Our checklist is the beneficiary product of lost money and lost deals from the things that we didn't know or the times that we skipped our process. And so we've become very disciplined as a company because we've had a lot as failures and mistakes that where we've deviated for the process cost us money. And we realize we create process for a reason. You're not creating a process to be a bureaucrat. You're not trying to remove creativity out of the system, but you need to mitigate risk and you need to be able to scale. And it's by getting things out of your head and putting it into a formal process that somewhat does some of the thinking for you, freeing you up to solve the really creative process, the really creative problems like how do I grow my business, or how could I raise more money, or what's something new that I could bring to this deal that I couldn't before, that you can't do when your mind is trying to remember whether you forgot something or not.
And that capturing a process starts before you have employees, not after.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it, right? So when you're going to bring people on, you need to have somewhat of a process to bring them onto. Otherwise, you're asking, for a problem, right? Like they need a process to be able to step into. So you need to have a basic framework for your process, but it's also okay for a certain level of employees that they will help you create that process to find a little bit more for what they do. But you shouldn't just assume that they are going to build that on their own. That's your responsibility as the entrepreneur, is to give them an environment for success.
Yeah, I love this being a process guy. I think process is got a bad rap in a lot of people. It takes away creativity. Everything's a process. If I want to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, there is a process that you follow. You might not even realize. You take the bread out of the bag. You put the peanut butter on there's a whole step-by-step process you follow. It's just in your head. As a business owner, your goal is to streamline that process and get it written down, and then hopefully give it to someone else to do. And then they look at it and say, nope, we can do this and this different, and that'll make it faster and better.
If you're going to make one peanut butter and jelly sandwich this year, you could probably fumble your way through it, right? But if you're going to make 10 million this year, you're not going to be the one to do it. It will be a process that has been implemented by many other people. And if you want to continue to sell millions and millions of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, there better be some consistency there. And you're going to have multiple people need to be able to do it the same way. The same as in real estate. You want to buy one rental off the MLS that's ready, it's turnkey, ready to go. Probably don't need much of a process besides just calling the agent on the sign in front of the house. But if you're going to scale anything in business, especially in real estate, you need to have it documented, and you need to do it the same way over and over again. One, it eliminates confusion and risk, but it also allows you to multiply faster. So you're taking a whole lot less time with each step. In real estate, and especially land development, is one of those, because there's so many steps along the way. One, I don't want to forget them. And two, I need to be able to do them faster.
So if there's somebody out there that's interested in getting into land development and, kind of wants to short cycle some of this learning, tell me about, I think you have a course that you're going to be launching soon. Tell me about that. How can people find more information about that? And I know you have a checklist as well.
Yeah. So, this checklist that I speak of, have put this in a format that we can give investors. And so, if you're even halfway interested in building new construction or buying land, you need this checklist. This took us years and thousands of dollars of lost money that you don't have to lose. So, I'd love to get that checklist into your hand. Lauren will be able to provide a link in the show notes for you to go and get that checklist. And then we're launching our course that is going to teach our 7-step process for development. Whether you're a builder or someone who might want to build or just want to be a land developer, we're thinking about the development process all the way from strategy until your exit. And each one of these steps has processes along the way. There's tools that you need, and there's the team that you need to be able to get involved. And so that you can, through that link where you download that checklist, it'll give you the option to sign up for that course. I'd love to help anybody with that, Lauren. I spend most of my weeks helping my clients and other people who are interested in buying land underwrite deals. So we have a lot of reps, not just in what we buy, but some of the clients that we help develop property as well. And I can only take that time so far, but what I can do is put that knowledge outside of a one-on-one call into a course format where we can start learning those principles, because ultimately what you need is the principles. You don't need Blake Anderson to look at your deal. You need the checklist, and you need a process that helps you follow it all along the way. And this will compound compress time when you have the process that works.
Love it. Yeah. So all of that will be in the show notes. And as a teaser, I will also be participating in your course.
Thank you.
Just because I want to take advantage of your experience in this market, because I do not have 10 years and 20 years of contracting. And I'm always looking to pick up new information that's going to de-risk my lending and help my developers and our business grow as well. So anybody else that's listening, you'll see me on there as well at times.
Hey, Lauren, let me ask you a question here. So much has been about my stories. What are you seeing with some of the developers that you're helping underwrite deals? What do you feel like their challenges are? I mean, you could speak to this as much as me. You're dealing with these folks on a daily basis. You're underwriting their deals along with them. You're having to evaluate whether they're a good bet, because ultimately you're taking a bet on them. You're hoping that they underwrote their deal, the right way. And so what are you kind of seeing as the need in the marketplace for, new developers?
Yeah. So new developers go, the biggest challenge that we're seeing is just the shifting in the market dynamics. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and I know you've seen this as well, condos in the Raleigh market. Everybody wanted condos, build townhomes, build townhomes, build townhomes. And so everyone's kind of got it in their mind that high density townhomes are the way to make the best money. But as the townhome market softens, that might not necessarily be the case. There might be other ways of either these small footprint single family homes that they're doing in Durham now, or just straight up putting 3-2 single family homes in. You've got to look at multiple options when you're deciding on how to use the land. And I think too many people just get locked into, this is what is going to happen, or I know they're going to put townhomes in here, and so that's when I'm going to start the process, that filtering down of what they're going to sell it for versus what I can sell it as paper lots. And like I mentioned, we're trying to help people buy property and either get out at paper lots or at vertical, whether that's through a sale or a refinance. But you still have to know what your customer wants, and your customer in that case is the builder. And if the builder's building single family homes because that's what they can sell the best, then there's no point in starting that process thinking you're going to build townhomes. So that's the number one thing that I'm seeing currently. Number 2, 3 through whatever is understanding those UDOs and who to talk to in the city. You're not the only person that I've talked to that's, called somebody and say, oh, can I put this here? Oh, yeah, sure. And then they get farther down the process and talk to someone else, and that's not the case. Or, oh, there's a phase 2 plan for the 540 or something that's going on that impacts it. So understanding that, and then developers, there is a lot of terminology. And I think this is one of the big hurdles that new developers struggle with is, who do I talk to? And what the heck does all this stuff mean? I have to go to the what office and get the what document and talk to the who, and what do I need an architect for? I'm not building anything. I'm just breaking the land up into pieces. And, why do I need to talk to an engineer about where driveways are going? All these things, that there's just so much terminology and so much complexity in it that it's daunting at first.
Yeah.
But the opposite side of that is because there's so much complexity and because there's so much challenge, there's so much opportunity because the average Joe isn't going to come in and do it. And so once you get that knowledge and that experience, like there's a lot of opportunity there to make money and make a name for yourself.
Yeah, that's right. So much you said, I look at what we do as having four pillars or four buckets, and one of those being your knowledge, the second's your process, then there's your tools and your team. And that knowledge bucket is so big. And the thing about real estate is it's localized and it's specialized. And you not only have to know the rules of the game in your area, but you need to know the trends of your area. And then you need to know the numbers of your area and be able to know how to comp property correctly and know an area enough to know whether when it's overly saturated with something or whether it's something is still going to be favorable in the market. And so what might work 30 minutes in the same metropolitan area may not work 30 minutes outside of town, may not work in the city center. What may work in rural Franklin County may not work in rural Johnston County. There's nuances to the areas. And so taking the time to look into those trends is super important.
Yeah, and you mentioned the length of the entitlement process. There's a chance that you start the entitlement process in 2024. It doesn't finish until 2026, and the market's shifted. So knowing what your exit strategy is and maybe having some flexibility there, that's valuable too. But you gotta have some sort of crystal ball into what the future is going to hold.
Yeah, and we're still going. There's always going to be risk, and we're still going to be taking a chance. But we mitigate that risk through our knowledge of the rules, of the trends, and watching the area that we're developing in, and then we mitigate that risk through an effective process, the right tools, and having a good team. And I'll tell you, that team is really important. Can't say it enough. It seems straightforward, but not every surveyor, not every realtor, not every civil engineer in your area is a specialist in every part of your area. Just as the rules of the game are different every area, there are surveyors who specialize in certain areas. There are civil engineers who specialize in certain areas, and being able to have the right team to give you the right advice. You get a realtor that's used to working in suburban areas, give you advice on what to build in an urban area, and you might really screw up, and vice versa, right? So really continuing to keep your team broadening with people that you can trust and have that specialty. So we develop property in kind of a large area, an hour outside of Raleigh in all directions. So we're talking about, 100 miles across, up and down all ways. And we have multiple realtors on our team that we've chosen that specialize in those different areas because we know that what might sell in Burlington is going to be a different price point and product than what's going to sell all the way over in Wake County and Wake Forest. And the same is with your surveyor, your architect, your engineers.
Great points. Great points. All right. So I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody on this podcast. I know you've heard it before, but knowing what you know now, life, business, anything, if you were to go back to yourself when you were 18 and give yourself advice, or to your children when they turn 18, 19, what advice would you give them on any topic you'd like at either your age when you're 18 or when they turn?
Yeah, it'd probably be twofold, a personal advice and a professional advice. And I would say personally, I undervaluated humility. You apply humility to every aspect of your life and you get places so much quicker. You get farther faster. We need other people. We don't have all the answers and there's so much to learn. I love that old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And it takes humility to learn from those around you. And sometimes humility means you're going to pay money for someone that has information that you don't. Sometimes it means you're going to give away equity in a deal to someone that has information you don't. Sometimes that means you're going to say you're sorry and I screwed up. That's going to make room in a relationship to be successful together rather than, being contentious. So that's on the personal side. And then professionally, I would say I didn't take seriously these two business concepts, assets and scale. Way too early in my career, I was just too focused on a small portion of my business. I became a business owner early, but I was focused on the tactical doing of my business rather than thinking about scale in a business. There's lots of businesses that don't make much money because they're not thinking in terms of scale. And so you got to start thinking scale quickly. The other thing about it is thinking in terms of assets, asset value of your business and asset value on your balance sheet. And it took way too long for me to understand the value of putting assets on the balance sheet and thinking of my business as an asset.
I couldn't agree more with the humility. I couldn't agree more with the asset piece. And I couldn't agree more with the other piece as well. All of that is just 100% true. Blake, this has been a true pleasure. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you, reach out to you, talk to you, and get your insights?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube, Envision Investor Solutions, Envision Investor Solutions, also envision-investor.com. Always putting content out there to help the aspiring land developers and new construction folks that want to be successful in this business.
Awesome. And I will make sure all of that is in the show notes. So if anybody is interested in developing, learning from Blake and his years of experience, please reach out to him. He's a wealth of knowledge and a great guy to talk to. Blake, I truly appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the podcast. And I can't wait to continue to see how your business and your course goes. Thanks for tuning in to Brick by Brick Wealth Building Conversations. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more people find the show. For more tips, resources, and updates on my journey, follow me on Invest with Lauren. Let's keep building wealth, one brick at a time. See you next week.